Robert Mieth, who's a PhD candidate at the Control System Group at TU Berlin and at the New York University Smart Energy Research Group led by Yury Dvorkin. He receives his master's degree in electrical engineering and a master's degree in industrial engineering from TU Berlin. And he's also worked as a software developer for a green tech company called Solandeo. Robert will talk about risk and variance-aware electricity pricing, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Let me set this up properly. Can you confirm that you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, both.
Okay, perfect. All right. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Mieth, and in this presentation, I will give an overview on our work on risk and variance-aware electricity pricing. This work has been done together with Chip Kim and Yury Dvorkin from NYU. Yury will also be present in the chat during the talk, so please feel free to post any question also during the presentation, but of course I will also answer questions afterwards. Okay. Our understanding of how to efficiently and fairly price electricity has mainly been shaped by the theory of electricity spot pricing. In their seminal work, Schweppe and co-authors aimed to find a pricing mechanism that enabled utility customer transaction based on today's needs and that considers the engineering problems of controlling, operating, and planning an electric power system. Today's needs in, I cannot switch to the next slide for some reason. Okay, sorry. Today's needs in 1988 were, of course, different from the challenges the modern power system faces. 30 years ago, the push for a liberalized electricity market and vertical disintegration required an electricity pricing concept that effectively conveys spatial information in the interconnected bulk power system and relates electricity prices to commodity prices. While this remains true in 2020, we now push for a decarbonized and sustainable power system leading to a more decentralized generation with high share of stochastic renewable energy sources. Therefore, a pricing and market mechanism that fits today's needs should enable a deeper interaction of utilities and system operators with small-scale decentralized resources, incentivize the provision of flexible capacity, and mitigate the physical and financial risks of stochastic energy sources. In this presentation, we will discuss a pricing mechanism that internalizes the physical risk of stochastic renewable energy sources from the system perspective and the perspective of market participants. In some of our recent research, we have also explored the effects of financial risk. I will mention that a bit later on in the presentation again. Okay, let's take a look at the well-known locational marginal price, here denoted as lambda I. The great practicality of the LMP is, of course, that it emerges as the dual variable of the power balance. And it is therefore efficient, and we understand its components quite well, which are usually the marginal cost of generation and some system cost. And depending on the underlying power flow formulation and the studied market structure, we can analyze the system cost even further and extract more information on the state of the system. The question at hand is now, what if the market or the formulation of the power balance is no longer deterministic, but is defined by an uncertain renewable injection and an uncertain system response? To answer this question, we formulated a chance-constrained optimal power flow problem. Uncertain active power injection from renewable sources is given as a forecast value and a random variable omega that describes the deviation from this forecast in real time. Controllable generators balance the forecast error via an affine control policy, which means that each generator decides on a participation factor alpha I that defines how much of the total imbalance this generator will take in. In addition to the active power balancing, all system state variables will react to the forecast error and the balancing efforts of the controllable generators in some way, depending on the node type, like PV, PQ, or reference node, and the treatment of the power factor, gamma, at this node. Without going into detail here, we can find a suitable linear description of these responses based on the first order Taylor expansion. And this linear relation between the random vector of forecast errors and the system states variables allows us to formulate a set of chance constraints where we require each variable to be contained within its limits with high probability defined by epsilon. The resulting formulation is second order conic and therefore convex, and the OPF solution internalizes the physical risk of any uncertain variable violating its technical boundaries given by the chance constraints. The OPF itself seeks to minimize expected costs and is therefore considered risk neutral from a financial perspective. If the optimization was risk averse, we could also discuss the effects of financial risk, but this is beyond the scope of this presentation. Using the convexity of the conic problem formulation, we can find LMPs for active and reactive power in a classic fashion as the dual multipliers of the active and reactive power balances. These prices reflect the marginal cost of providing active and reactive power given the forecasted value of the uncertain injection. Because we additionally require the balancing participation of all generators to exactly cover for the uncertain forecast error, we can interpret the resulting constraint as a real-time power balance that yields a dual price on providing balancing reserve, here given as G. Both the energy and the balancing reserve prices therefore internalize the risk of constraint violation as captured by the chance constraints and tuned by the risk level or confidence level epsilon. All right, let's take a closer look at these prices. First, we find that despite the more complex formulation of the chance constraint ACOPF, the active and reactive power prices are not explicitly depending on uncertainty and risk, but classically recover marginal generation costs. These prices, of course, implicitly depend on the duals of active constraints. For example, the admissible amount of power flow through a transmission line might be reduced to accommodate uncertain fluctuations, which can lead to more congestion and so higher or lower LMPs depending on which side of the congestion the LMP is. Second, we find that the balancing reserve price is in fact explicitly depending on uncertainty and risk. For example, looking at the component that originates from the chance constraints on generation, we see that this price is composed from the total uncertainty in the system, given by S, the marginal value of generator constraint relaxation given by the deltas, and the risk perception given by the C epsilon value. And additionally, we get the price component for each uncontrollable system variable that captures the trade-off between the value of constraint relaxation of this variable given by its dual, the risk level epsilon, and the resulting standard deviation or volatility of the variable noted as sigma. Here I've given the example for the voltage component of this price component. Okay, and finally, because these prices are derived as the duals from the convex market formulation, they are efficient and can constitute a competitive equilibrium, meaning a remuneration scheme that uses these prices can ensure cost recovery, revenue adequacy, and incentive compatibility. While these prices effectively evaluate risk-aware binding constraints, the resulting volatility of state variables is not explicitly considered. However, highly fluctuating voltages, for example, and power flows are not desirable for power system equipment and overall system security. As an example, let's take a closer look on the chance constraint on voltage magnitudes, here given in the second order conic reformulation. This reformulation uses the value at risk to find a security margin between the expected value and the limit of the respective variable. And this margin is defined by a risk coefficient resulting from the desired risk level, epsilon, and the standard deviation of the variable, which can be expressed by the second order conic constraint. And we've introduced the auxiliary variable t to connect the standard deviation with this value at risk like constraint. By introducing these auxiliary variables and therefore the standard deviation into the objective function of our problem, we can render the optimal power for problem variance aware in a quite straightforward manner. And here we choose to penalize variance, which means the square of the standard deviation with an affine penalty factor psi. The resulting variance-aware energy prices remain unchanged to what we have seen before, but the balancing reserve prices now additionally consider a trade-off between the marginal values of constraint relaxation and the variance penalty, again given for the voltage magnitudes as an example here. Okay, let's take a look at some illustrative numerical results. This table shows the results for the chance constraint ACOPF of the IEEE 118 bus network with around 30% generation from renewable energy sources, and each with a standard deviation of 10 to 20% of its forecast. The columns of this table compare the study cases with deterministic constraints, chance constraints only on generation limits, the fully chance constraint problem, and the variance-aware problem with different penalty factors. First, we see that introducing the chance constraints modestly increases the expected cost, but will of course reduce the ex post costs, meaning that by internalizing the uncertainty, the result will be slightly more conservative, but avoids additional costs resulting from the uncertain injections in the long run. Next, we see that increasing the variance penalty increases the cost for balancing, or the balancing price. Basically, increasing the penalty leads to a higher price for balancing regulation, but has almost no effect on the expected generation cost. And finally, the variance-aware solution effectively is able to reduce the volatility of state variables until an additional reduction becomes too expensive. For example, we see that the sum of voltage volatility is immediately reduced to around 25%, then to 4%, 1%, but not reduced much more, even with an increasing variance penalty. If we now plot the LMPs for the different cases, we find some supporting results on our theoretical findings that the energy prices only implicitly depend on uncertainty and risk. The box plots show that the LMP values do not change much between the different cases except for some single nodes. Looking at the heat map, which shows the relative difference between the LMPs in the deterministic and the variance-aware case, we see that the cause for the LMP difference at some nodes is a tighter security margin on the lines between nodes 20 and 23 that leads to congestion. All right, to summarize, we have derived the set of energy and balancing reserve price that internalize renewable energy source uncertainty and the physical risk of constraint violation. For the mentioned financial risk mitigation, I refer to our recent work in the CSS letters. The derived energy prices do not explicitly depend on risk and uncertainty and reflect the marginal value of active and reactive power. And balancing reserve price, on the other hand, can be decomposed into the risk-adjusted marginal values of constraint relaxation. We have argued that these prices constitute competitive equilibrium in a complete market and have additionally introduced a variance penalty that can be used to control the volatility of state variables and have shown its impact on the energy and balancing prices. All right, this summary now concludes the talk. I am looking forward to answer some of your questions, and if you want to reach out, you can contact us under the given email addresses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. And questions for our speaker? While we're waiting for questions to come in, maybe I can pose one on my own side. Is the change to the equilibrium price dependent? I'm not sure I caught that, although I'm sure you covered it. Is it dependent on parameters that the auctioneer needs to estimate that relate to the uncertainty? For example, variance of the underlying uncertainty?
Yes, so in this specific work, we assume that, so for example, the bids of the producers would be augmented by their individual risk assessment, and that also that the market or all market participants have some information on the forecasted renewable injection and the uncertainty related to this injection. So in this, so this assumes a symmetric information on these parameters.
Okay, thank you. And I think Yury has raised his hand, but I'm not sure what to do with that. Pedro, or maybe, yeah, he actually sent this question in the Q&A. And he's, I think, explaining in essence, the underlying assumption is that there is a third-party market provider for recast. Okay.
Yeah, for the, I think, yeah, for the forecast, yeah.
For forecast, yeah, right. Okay, thank you. Any other questions from our audience? Have you tried, I continue my inquiry. Have you tried running this idea through market operators, kind of get a feeling of their response to the proposal?
I'm not sure if Yury has. I did not have yet the opportunity to get in contact with an actual market operator on that. No, I cannot comment on that. But we're continuing to work on this a bit more to refine it. Oh, Yury says yes. They like the idea of solving a deterministic problem.
And there's quite a bit of action related to scarcity prices. That's, I mean, based on ORDC, which are rather dependent on amount of remaining reserve capacity in the system. I'm not sure if there's any connection to this, but you could in a way ride the wave of, you know, PJM just implemented ORDC scarcity pricing. So looks like they're open to adders related to uncertainty. Do you see any connections to ORDC type scarcity prices?
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple ways of including additional, like, let's say, external requirements that then would, of course, alter the price or lead to additional needs. I mean, you could include some fixed reserve capacities. Probably the requirements for actual system operators would require some additional reserves for contingencies and everything. But of course, that's something that can be included and that has been included in different work.
Okay, I think we're right on the clock with this last response from Robert. So thanks to all our panelists for their very nice contributions, and to all the attendees. Have a nice afternoon from Europe, at least, and take care. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.